I'm going to take that under advisement and seriously look at the caramel apple. But let's get started, everybody. In case you haven't heard, this is Lauren Coe. She is a pie baker extraordinaire. And I do not say that lightly because on the second or third page of her book, she talks about how Martha Stewart came to her for advice about pies. And that's a huge compliment in most places in the United States. Um, Lauren, give us a little sense of your background and how the fact was that you're really not raised to be a baker.
Yeah, I mean it's very totally wild and kind of an accident actually. So my professional background is in social work and nonprofit administration. I like to say that I grew up in a family of phenomenal eaters, so had the great gift of being surrounded by food, was always eating good food, had family members making good food. But in a Chinese, Honduran American family, not a lot of traditional apple pie happening. I moved to Seattle with my partner 4 years ago and was looking for a job, something in social work, something in the nonprofit sector. And as I was, fun employed, had some extra time on my hands and was just messing around on the internet as one does and stumbled across some really beautiful pictures of pie. They kind of made me think like, I've been, cooking and baking here and there for fun and, to feed myself, but somehow had never made a pie before and thought, well, I have some extra time on my hands. I wonder if I can do it. And so I just went for it, made my first plaid lattice apple pie, and it was fine. Didn't change my life. I didn't instantly transform into a pie lady. It was just something that I kind of added to my repertoire of things I was making for fun on the weekends or weeknights. Eventually I got a regular office job here in Seattle. And over the next year, maybe made a pie or two here or there, had one particular piezaster that kind of put me off pies for a bit. And then August of 2017, I started my Loco Kitchen Instagram account. And that was also kind of a fluke. I just felt like I was becoming that friend and putting too many food photos in my personal account, and just wanted a separate holding place for some of these photos that I was keeping just for myself, documenting things I was baking for fun. And it was supposed to be kind of a catch-all. So blueberry muffins, summer salads, things like that. But it just so happened that the first photo I shared was a geometric pizza pie. And it got something like 500 or 600 likes, which as a regular person totally blew my mind. And I thought, something crazy is happening, or maybe this was an accident. So a few days later, I posted another photo of a tart, and that also got a couple hundred likes. And again, just totally mind-boggling. Wasn't sure what was happening. I considered maybe turning my account back on private because it felt kind of scary. I didn't know who these people were, where they were coming from. But decided to give it, a couple weeks to see, whether this was just a flash in the pan or something was happening here. I continued to post photos of pies and tarts that I was making just for fun on the weekends. And within a month, I had hit 1,000 followers on Instagram, and by December, I hit 100,000 followers. And a month after that, I quit my office job to see where this was going. And, a little over 3 years later, here we are. I am doing this full time, and I just published my first book specifically focused on pie and tart design.
Okay, now let's back up. It's my understanding, Lauren, that you aren't necessarily possessive of a sweet tooth.
That is correct. So there's a lot of kind of ironic things about this pie journey. And one of them is that I don't really have a sweet tooth. So I don't eat a ton of the pies that I bake. I do kind of taste here and there, and I, have my recipes down. So I want to make sure they taste good. But for the most part, I basically share everything I make with friends, family, neighbors, or occasionally I have the opportunity to donate them to, fundraisers or kind of local bake sales. But yeah, that's kind of one of the funny parts about all of this is that I don't really love eating pies all that much, although I do have a handful of savory recipes in my book. And anytime I do make a savory pie, we kind of keep that for ourselves and have those for dinner or, breakfast or lunch or snack. But yeah, it's just one of those things.
Which begs the next question. How far have you shipped a pie? We're in Ohio. Have you ever thought about shipping a pie to Ohio?
I don't do it often. I don't sell my pies, and that's partly because I haven't found a good way to ship them. I tried it once. My friend was having a baby in Boston, and I tried to overnight a pie with ice packs and everything. And, it was like packed tightly in a box that said this side up and that kind of thing. And of course, it landed on her doorstep upside down and sat there for, a couple hours until she got home from work. So by the time she opened it, it was just thawed and pie juice was everywhere. And she still baked it and still ate it. But I have not tried to ship anything since then.
Okay.
But you'll be first on my list if I find a good solution.
I'll hold you to that. Lauren, I think you have taken pies to a new height. As one who bakes pies, I was in awe when I saw these pies.
Oh, thank you.
For those of you that have joined us, you're welcome to put some questions in the question box. And at some point, you will be seeing pictures of some of Lauren's pies in the presentation. We can't put them all there, but certainly I want you to get a sense of how spectacular these pies look.
Thank you.
I take it that most of them taste spectacular too.
Yeah, I think I initially got into this because of the art of it. My favorite part is creating the designs and playing with color and pattern and texture. But of course, it just so happens that my medium is edible. And because I do share everything I make with friends, families, and neighbors, I have to make sure that they not only look good, but they taste good. And that was something I worked really hard on. And as I was developing these recipes is finding interesting flavor combinations and coming up with, designs that are visually delicious, but also delicious to eat.
Do you feel as though you've exhausted those yet?
I don't think so. Sometimes inspiration like ebbs and flows, and sometimes I have a lot of ideas in a week, and then there are some weeks where, I'm just kind of making the same thing over and over. But I think I still have a stash of ideas and kind of things I want to try that I'm sure I'll be making pies for at least the foreseeable future.
How do you choose your designs?
Yeah, good question. So I take inspiration from pretty much everywhere, everything. I have pies and tarts in my book and in my Instagram feed that are inspired by architecture, textiles, patio furniture, public bathroom floors, storm drains, pretty much, kind of anything that has lots of geometric patterns, any sort of sharp angles. But on the flip side, I'm also inspired by seasonal produce. A lot of times, how I decide what to make is driven by what I have on hand. So if I have a ton of apples that are going a little soft in the fridge, or I just happen to have a whole crate of mangoes, I'm probably going to build something around that. So, finding interesting flavor combinations that pair well with mango. Or if I'm going to make a tart, I think about other fruits or other colors that will kind of contrast or complement those colors. So it's all kind of interconnected. And I think that kind of goes back to your previous question about, do I run out of ideas? I think constantly surrounded by food and, inspiration from kind of the world around me. So I think that the ideas are are endless.
Speak a little to your palate background. I think because you have traveled the world some, you have a very worldly palate in some ways.
Thank you. I definitely feel privileged and grateful to have grown up in a family that was kind of a mesh of culture. So my dad is originally from Hong Kong, and he immigrated to California as a child. My mom was born and raised in Honduras, and I was born and raised in San Diego, California, but spent a lot of pretty much every summer and every Christmas at my grandmother's house in Honduras. So we grew up eating, traditional American food, lots of Chinese food, Honduran food, and I think because I was exposed to a lot of different like flavors and kind of a mix of things, I am open to lots of different flavors and kind of have this store of experiences to draw from as I'm kind of coming up with interesting flavor combinations and interesting things to put on top of my pies, but also inside them.
Okay, so now we need some very basic questions. Are
Let's
you
do
a
it.
butter, lard, or shortening crust kind of person?
I am all butter all the way. So if you have seen my book, you'll notice that all of my pie dough recipes are strictly all butter. I prefer the taste of the way an all butter crust bakes. And I think it also handles well. So some of my designs in the book, especially, the woven ones, they take a little bit more time and a little bit more handling. And I find that all butter doughs are a little more durable for those kind of designs. I think lard is good for making a really tender crust, but I find that it gets a little melty and soft and harder to handle. And again, I'm just a regular person shopping at my local grocery store. So if I can kind of cut down on basic ingredients, then I will probably do so. So my, pie dough recipe is just all butter, flour, and a little bit of sugar. I don't do any of the vodka or apple cider vinegar or any of the extra things, which can be interesting or, can be to a particular baker's preference. But if I can kind of simplify my ingredients and focus them on, the design aspect, then usually that's the route I try to choose.
I was really surprised to see a cauliflower crust.
In my book?
Yeah, was I mistaken? Maybe I was mistaken. It was a tart with a cauliflower kind of cauliflower flour crust.
I don't think so.
Maybe I am mistaken.
I do have a cauliflower tart in my Instagram feed, not in the book, but I have done one with different color cauliflower.
So you use a variety of produce, I think, that would be non-traditional in some ways.
Yes, sometimes. I think that I'm also really lucky living up in the Pacific Northwest. We have a lot of markets at our fingertips, and especially in the summer, I have a farmer's market that's less than a mile from my house and just has this bounty of really interesting fruits and vegetables that I love experimenting with. So again, always looking to play with flavor and also color and texture.
Do you have a favorite flavor?
Favorite flavor. There is a white carrot miso pie in my book that I pair with a black sesame crust, and I really love that because it's really a dessert pie. It's sweet, but it's subtly sweet, so not super rich, not very heavy or cloying, and with that touch of miso, it has a little bit of savoriness to give it some interest. And then paired with the black sesame crust, it has that like slight bitterness and that extra textural crunch as well.
Do you have a favorite design, a go-to design?
I would say what has become my signature spoke is my go-to and probably my favorite. I think I developed that design a month after I started my Instagram account, and I was inspired by string art. And I mean, really, I kind of gravitated towards this geometric aesthetic because I thought it would be easier to execute designs made up of straight lines because then you just cut your dough in strips. And it's still crazy to me, even after all these years, that something that started in my humble little home kitchen has kind of launched out into the world. And I've seen professional chefs, I've seen other home cooks like me, I've seen, you know, amateur bakers make this design in their home kitchens or in their restaurants all over the world. So I think that design will kind of always have a special place in my heart for something that started in my home, and I'm now able to share with people all over.
From start to finish, when I have the pie on my fork or spoon, how many hours?
It really depends. I do have some tarts in my book that, you know, start to finish is 30 minutes to an hour. They come together very quickly. They're very simple. They're a minimal amount of ingredients. And then, you know, some of the pies will take a little bit longer, maybe up to 8 hours. But before anybody gets scared off, a lot of that is not active time. A lot of pie making is kind of hurry up and wait. So you make your dough, that's, you know, 15, 20 minutes, but then it has to rest for a couple hours in the fridge. And then you roll out your dough, you make your design. Some of the designs might be a little more complicated. My signature spoke, that takes about 10, 15 minutes. So really not complicated or difficult at all. But then, you know, the golden rule of pie making is to keep everything cold. So after I make my pie, I like to stick it in the fridge or in the freezer to chill before I bake. And then when it bakes, it has to bake for another couple hours. And then you're supposed to wait for the pie to cool before you slice into it so it's not soup. So it can be, you know, a commitment, a time commitment, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be standing in your kitchen that entire time. And I think the beauty of that kind of the nature of pie is that it makes it really easy to split up the process. So it's the perfect dessert for a holiday, where even if you're in charge of, you know, making that entire holiday meal, you can make your pie in advance, even weeks up in advance. So you can make your dough, stick that in the freezer, pull it out when you're ready. I like to make my entire pie and then just freeze it. And once the design is set solid, I will wrap it up and I will just keep it in my freezer until I have an opportunity or a need to bake it. And I will just pop it straight from the freezer into the oven. So it's a great thing that you can prepare ahead of time if you have some extra time on your hands, and then you know, have dessert when you need it.
Do you have multiple freezers, Lauren?
I do. As a result of this newfound career of mine, I have had to invest in a small chest freezer that we keep in our basement, and that is what I call the pie freezer. So I keep pretty much all my extra pie dough and all the pies that I, you know, can't bake off fast enough. And I recently kind of cleared out my stash and baked it all off and shared it with my friends for Thanksgiving, since we're all, you know, hopefully staying home and having these socially distant celebrations. I thought it would be nice to share some pies so that everybody can have, you know, something warm and something delicious, even if they're kind of celebrating contained with, you know, their bubble in their homes.
Interesting that you bring up the pandemic. I happen to adore the quote, when all hell breaks loose, bake. Do I have it somewhat correct?
Yeah, I think I use when all hell breaks loose, but you know, the same sentiment. So yeah, I mean, I think we saw a big sourdough movement at the beginning of the pandemic where everybody was home, had lots of time on their hands, and got really into bread baking. And now that we're fully in the holiday swing and what I call peak pie season, I hope that people are now kind of transitioning into using that time to maybe make some pie art or some tart art. And, you know, for me, this kind of venture is something that I enjoy. I find it really therapeutic and soothing. And it's kind of this happy intersection of my interest in art and baking and feeding the people I love. So I get to have this experience where I get to create something and have that kind of Zen moment. And then I get to bake it off and share it with my loved ones. So Highly recommend it as an activity, whether you're trying to fill up some time or looking for something to spark a little joy, or, or you're looking for ways to kind of cheer someone up in your community. I think this kind of touches all of that. And this is a good moment to kind of jump into that.
Talk to me a little bit about some of the basics. When you make a pie and you freeze, let's suppose you freeze your dough, as you said, how long do you recommend dough be saved in a freezer and then used?
If it's well sealed, I think it'll last 3 to 6 months. It will keep pretty well. The only thing I recommend before freezing it is making sure that you allow that rest time in the refrigerator so that, the gluten can relax and form and do all of that before you pop it in the freezer. But same with the pies. Pretty much all of my pies with the fruit fillings, they will freeze and keep well for, a couple months. Which is really nice. So if you get into the zone and you just happen to, make a ton of pies right now and can't necessarily eat them all, you can pop those in the freezer and wrap them up, and they'll keep for, springtime or something like that.
Have you thought much about what goes with a piece of pie?
I personally prefer ice cream, but whipped cream is a classic as well. I guess it also depends on what kind of pie it is. I was recently on a pie panel where this baker makes flavored butters, like does different kinds of whipped butters that she puts on top of her pie, and that sounds decadent and amazing. But I personally prefer a nice cold scoop of ice cream.
Have you thought about cheeses?
Cheeses. I do have a whole wheat cheddar chive crust in my book. That uses about 4 ounces of cheddar in it. I've never put melted a slice of cheese on top of a pie as I've seen done, but maybe that's something I should consider since I do love a good savory note.
What advice do you have to someone who's never baked a pie and wants to try?
My advice is to just jump in. Again, I made my first pie 4 years ago. I am self-taught, and I truly believe that if I can do this, anybody can. So basically my strategy was just to pick a recipe, which I think I Googled, somewhere online, and just kind of made it and kept doing it. I think pie is one of those things that you can follow a recipe, maybe one in Pieometry, but really the kind of comfort and technicality comes with, practice and doing it over and over and kind of learning by feel. So jump in, I say just go for it, and don't let any sort of failures or setbacks deter you, because in my personal experience, mistakes and disasters or piezasters are kind of the experiences that taught me the most about pie making. So they can definitely be learning experiences.
Instagram is so popular, and it sounds like your life has changed as a result of a pie or a tart or two. Are there any big companies courting you or wanting to talk to you about taking this in a very large commercial way?
I've had a few inquiries, but I'm not particularly interested in selling pies. I like to tell people I'm still kind of riding the wave and seeing where it will take me. So I'm not sure where Loco Kitchen is headed long term, but I think one thing that I'm fairly certain of is I don't have plans to have a bakery or any sort of brick and mortar or to kind of license out designs. But again, never say never. You really never know where life will take you. And more than anybody, I should know that. So who knows?
Friends beg you for pies?
Luckily, I make such a high volume that I kind of wonder if they're going to beg me to stop giving them pies, because I'm constantly offloading so many on them. But so far, I've built a pretty lovely community here in Seattle where people are happy to help me eat pies or share with their friends. And I'm happy to kind of make these pies and also not see them go to waste. So far, so good.
Do you have another book coming out?
Nothing in the works yet. I did just come out with this one a couple months ago. So, we're still excited about Pieometry, still celebrating that. And, I hadn't shared any recipes or designs really before in terms of how to's. So this is the first kind of big share. And I think that we will be promoting and celebrating Pieometry for a bit, but who knows? Maybe a sequel or a volume 2 is, could be in the pipeline. Womp womp.
So, Lauren, let's talk about tools of the trade. Do you like metal? Do you like tin? Do you like glass? What do you like for a pie pan?
So I usually reach for I think it's an aluminum pan. It's by USA Pan. That's kind of my go-to. It has this kind of corrugated bottom that really crisps up nicely, so no soggy bottoms. But I also use the really basic glass Pyrex pans. And then, to be honest, because I give away so many of my pies, I also use a lot of those disposable foil tins. And that way, as I share these pies with people around me, I don't have to worry about tracking down pie plates and getting them back. So that's usually the arsenal I reach for, but I like to tell people that my toolkit is pretty basic and pretty minimal. In the book, I encourage people to kind of use what they have and make do. You don't have to invest a lot of money in really fancy things or fancy specialized equipment. When I made my first pie, I had just moved across the country and I didn't even have a ruler. So to cut those dough strips, I used a giant cookie sheet and a paring knife, which was unwieldy, but hey, it worked. And, if you don't have a rolling pin, pull out a wine bottle, that kind of thing. So I'm not particularly brand loyal in terms of ingredients or tools, but, I am a big proponent of kind of looking around your house and making do with what you have and being resourceful.
How often do you bake? Do you bake daily?
It depends. So there are weeks where I bake every single day and I'm baking, 8 to 9 pies in a day, and then there are weeks where it's mostly administrative work. So I like to tell people every day is different. My schedule is kind of all over the place. So I think because I bake in such a volume, it is nice to have a break and to not bake sometimes.
How did your family react to your newfound pie habit?
I think everybody has been a little baffled as I was in the beginning, but also really excited. And I think one of the best parts of this journey, and particularly coming out with this book, is celebrating it with all of my friends and family who knew me, pre-Loco Kitchen as, not a pie lady. So to kind of see me stumble into this and be able to share it with so many people to such excited reception has been quite the honor for me, but also really exciting for my friends and family as well. Although in the beginning, I have to say my parents were skeptical because they didn't really know what Instagram was or how to use it. And, I remember days of like teaching them how to get an account and how to like a photo and then how to leave a comment and what an emoji is. So I think we've come a long way since then.
You mentioned soggy bottoms.
Mm-hmm.
Are you one of those people that likes to pre-bake your crusts, or do you have tricks for avoiding those soggy bottoms?
It depends. So I don't always blind bake for pies like a pumpkin pie or my white carrot miso pie or anything that's kind of custard based. I do blind bake, and that's where you pre-bake your pie shell and then fill it and then you bake it again just to make sure that your crust is cooked through all the way. But with my fruit pies or my savory pies, I don't do that. As added insurance, sometimes I will keep a pizza stone in my oven, and I will just leave that on the rack so it gets nice and hot as the oven preheats. And then I put my pie on a rimmed baking sheet and I just stick that right on top of the pizza stone. So that kind of directs additional heat to the bottom. But I find that with the aluminum pans and the foil pans and the glass pie plates that I use, they conduct heat pretty well. So I don't usually have to worry about that. And I will say that one note that if you are a beginner and just starting out baking pies, those glass Pyrex plates can be really nice because they are clear and you can kind of check and see as you're baking to see if your pie bottom is done or not, or if it needs additional time.
Well, what do you say we take some questions and answers from the general public?
Yeah, sounds great. Let's do it.
What tools do you use to create your geometric designs? Asks Mia.
Yeah, so I have a section in my book that talks about all the tools that I use, which is really not that many. I rely heavily on my chef's knife and my paring knife. I do have a set of shape cutters, and that's just kind of a time saver. You don't need them to create some of these designs, but it can save you a little bit of time. So it's just like a little set of cookie cutters with, you know, maybe 6 different shapes, and each shape comes in 3 different sizes. And that can be really helpful for some of those repetitive, you know, triangle tessellations. And then I also use a pastry roller with a ruler. And I often use that as just a means of zipping through the dough and cutting lots of strips. But beyond that, it's pretty simple. It's just a rolling pin. I rely on my knives and occasionally some of these shape cutters.
One question from Lola: how do you prepare your designs? Is it based on an artist or a motif or a time period kind of inspiration?
Well, as I mentioned before, I kind of take inspiration from everything and everywhere. I do get a lot of questions if I sketch things out or I plan them, and I don't. I just kind of keep a mental, you know, folder of photos and images, and I also keep some Pinterest boards. And you know, when I set out to make a tart or a pie, I'll kind of scroll through some of those images, maybe look for some ideas or inspiration. I will pick, you know, one general concept so that I have a direction that I'm heading in, and then I just go for it. I find that if I plan things out in too great of detail, I tend to get frustrated because dough and fruit don't always cooperate the same way as, you know, sketching something out with pen or pencil. So pretty much what you see in my Instagram feed is just kind of the result of a particular creative session. So just kind of go for it and kind of see where the process takes me.
Julie wants to know how you transfer the crust to the pan.
Oh, that's a good question. So I usually, for my pie tops, I always build on a sheet of parchment. So once I roll my dough out, I will roll it onto my rolling pin, and then I will unfurl it onto a sheet of parchment. So I will cut all my strips there and then construct it on the pie top. Or for the woven designs, I will construct everything on that sheet of parchment. And then, you know, if it gets warm or once it's completed, I just slide that parchment onto a baking sheet and then freeze it solid so that you can kind of keep the integrity of the design and then pick up that pie top as one piece and place it on your pie top. Keep it nice and pristine and sharp.
Laura wants to know about your art background.
I don't have one. I've always loved art and design and just kind of had an affinity. I'm that person that will probably seek out the art museums in a city when I'm visiting. But beyond that, maybe I took an elective class in middle school and took one in high school, but I have no formal training. So I have no formal training in art, design, pastry, culinary. I am actually terrible at math. So for anybody who is math phobic, fear not, you don't have to do any sort of calculations or formulas to be able to create some of these geometric designs. You know, that's just one of those other ironies of having stumbled into this and yeah, just kind of started doing it for fun, and here we are.
Libby wants to know, are there certain types of produce that are easier to work with?
Yes, it really depends. So for, you know, my tart top designs where it's just the crust that's baked and, you know, maybe the curd is cooked, but the design is made with fresh fruit. I really love working with fruits like kiwi and mango and papaya because they slice really well. They kind of retain those shapes really well and have a lot of color and texture that lends beautifully to kind of those aesthetic designs. In terms of pie fillings, it really depends. Sometimes I like to work with apple slices so that I can kind of lay them into the pie shell and have that flat top to then create my pie dough designs on top. But otherwise, you know, if I set out to make a tart and it turns out my fruit is a little too mushy, too ripe, then I will kind of chop that up and save it for a pie filling instead. So yeah, there are definitely ideal produce, ideal fruits and vegetables for, you know, that are design specific or, you know, pie or tart specific respectively.
Ruth Ann says she enjoys your humor along with the posting. Do you consider yourself creatively a math geometry mindset or what?
I don't think that it's intentionally math or geometrically inclined because, as I mentioned, I'm actually terrible at math. It's always been my weakest subject. I think it's just something that kind of just so happened that my design aesthetic settled into that. So again, I encourage people, if you are don't are someone who doesn't love math or feel like you're not great at it, me too. So I really feel like these designs can be accessible to everyone, whether you are an engineer or otherwise.
Do you have favorites? Do you have a favorite one that you really go to occasionally for a family get together or friends night over?
Mm, it really depends on the crowd. I like to feed my friends and family things that they like. So, you know, if I'm with a group of friends who really love chocolate, I have a chocolate ganache tart with roasted hazelnuts in my book. Or, you know, I come from an Asian family, so we don't eat a lot of really rich, cloying sweets. So that white carrot miso pie is a good one. Or I have a passion fruit tart in my book that makes a really lovely dessert, but it's not very sweet, has that bright tart flavor. And is also really nostalgic for, you know, my family since I grew up eating a lot of passion fruit in Honduras or drinking a lot of passion fruit juice. So sometimes we go flavor specific.
Are any of these refrigerated kind of pies? The custards, do you tend to refrigerate those custards, I would assume?
I don't work with a ton of custards actually because I find that they are harder to design with. They're, you know, a little more rustic. But I do have a chocolate malted banana cream pie in my book. And that is, you know, you kind of cook the stovetop pudding and then whip up some cream and compile it and then keep it in the fridge. So I would say that that's maybe the closest thing to that question.
Who do you honor or respect or go to or consider the great gods of pies beyond yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. So when I initially stumbled across those beautiful pictures of pies, you know, way before when I first made my first pie, Julie Jones and Joe Harrington were the makers of those particular pies that I stumbled into. And then shortly thereafter, as my account started getting bigger, it's a pretty small community. So I've since become friends with them, which is really delightful. And then, of course, Kate McDermott is well known for her pie prowess. And she's kind of local to me. She also lives in Washington. So I've had the opportunity to appear at her pie camp, and we've gotten to interact on some like live segments together. And she is just a wealth of knowledge in terms of pie baking.
Okay, Lauren, now you've opened a whole new world to me. Could you talk about pie camp?
Yeah, so that's something Kate McDermott runs out of her home. I think they're usually a couple days long where she has people either stay in the area, or I think they used to kind of bunk in a dorm. And she kind of teaches them how to make pie dough and pie crust. It's definitely a little more lengthy than some of the workshops that I've run here in the city. Mine are usually only a couple hours. Obviously, pre-pandemic, I haven't been able to do any sort of workshops since this has started, and am considering virtual ones and possibly in the future. But yeah.
Have you run across any pie haters?
Of course. I think, as with anything that lives publicly, particularly online, there are always naysayers or people with strong feelings about anything and everything. And I think that was one of the most maybe jarring things that I had to learn to deal with when my account first took off, is that even though I just make something that may feel as innocuous as pie art, that there will always be somebody out there who has, strong words and strong feelings and feels compelled to share them. So I think that's just kind of comes with the territory, but I have also been really lucky that the feedback has been mostly positive, and I just am very grateful that people have responded so enthusiastically to things that I'm making at home and that I'm sharing.
Has your partner ever complained about the amount of time you spend on a pie?
I don't think so. I'm very lucky that he's been really supportive. I think maybe he's probably groaned if there are too many pies in the house in general and we need to like figure out what to do with them. He's obviously reached pie oversaturation, and he also doesn't really have a sweet tooth. So that's usually our biggest struggle, is just what to do with all these pies and who to pass them off with. But he recently, a year ago, he started a job here in Seattle where, he has a break room. And so I think he complains less now that we had, well, prior to the pandemic, we had a place for him to kind of bring these pies in and share with his coworkers, and they were happy. So yeah, I've been really lucky that he's very supportive.
Do you actually take the picture of the pie, or is there a professional photographer involved here?
No, that's all me. I am just, as they say, fake it till you make it. And just making it up as I go. I don't have extensive photography experience. I take all my photos with my iPhone, and the backdrop is just a $5 chalkboard from Home Depot that I kind of set on my dining bench right next to the window. So yeah, that's all me.
Well, Lauren, I have to tell you, I am very impressed.
Oh, thank you.
They are amazingly beautiful pies. I hope that they taste even half as good as they look. How many are you baking personally for Christmas?
I don't know. I obviously, our gathering is going to be very small this year. I think it might just be my husband and I, and since we don't eat a lot of pies, it might be zero. Thanksgiving is kind of the peak pie holiday, and I didn't make any pies. I made a flan instead. So, maybe this is my chance to take a break from pie. But I think that if I were to make one, I'd probably go the savory route. And there is a caramelized onion, Irish porter cheddar, and potato tart in my book that I'm actually not allowed to make that often because it's too delicious and we tend to eat it all way too fast. So maybe Christmas is the time that we indulge and allow ourselves that tart.
So I'm looking at the black and white woven nectarine pie, and you're telling me that you made those strips and wove that all within an hour?
Oh yeah. I think
Wow.
the beauty of kind of what I do is that many of my designs look more complicated than they are. And I have been loving seeing people bake the pies and tarts and the designs from Pieometry and say, I've never made a pie before, or, I've never done pie art before. And this was not only fun and delicious, but a lot easier than I expected. And, kind of some of my favorite feedback that I've gotten is from parents sending me photos of their children making pies from my book, whether by themselves or, as an activity that they do as a family. So I can't stress enough that if I can do this, I truly believe anybody can. And based on kind of the messages and emails I've gotten, there have been kids who have been baking from these books, and, people of all different ages. So yeah, don't be intimidated, and definitely have fun with them.
Mia asks, what's the secret to your scallops on the pie crusts?
My scallops?
The scalloping around the edges on some of them?
Oh, I guess the biggest tip I have is to make sure your pie is nice and cold before you bake. And that will kind of help preserve the integrity and the sharpness of those crimped edges. So again, I like to freeze my entire pie until it's solid, and then I will pop it into the oven completely frozen. And that can really help go a long way in having your pie baked up nicely. And then also make sure that your crimped edges are well within your pie plate, because if there's any overhang, you'll probably melt off as you're baking in the oven.
Well, Lauren, I think that you've made me very hungry. The pies look delicious. I am so anxious to go and try one. And I promise you, I will try one for Christmas. I'm not sure which one, but I'm going to try one.
Amazing. I can't wait to see what you bake up.
I'll definitely send you a picture and an email. If people want to get a hold of you, I imagine this is a great time for us to plug your Instagram. Would you like to tell everybody about it?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at Loco Kitchen, LOKO Kitchen. My website is locokitchen.com, and my email is over there. Otherwise, you can purchase my book, Pieometry, which is available everywhere books are sold.
And specifically in Hudson at the Learned Owl. And I know that they are selling briskly at the Learned Owl. So I would recommend that if you're interested, you better get there before Christmas. Lauren, it's been such a pleasure just to even look at these pies, let alone talk to you. Thank you for taking the time to do this with us. I truly appreciate it. You've become such a celebrity. I should tell people we saw you on CBS Sunday morning, and you're all over on the national pie alert. Everyone's hollering about Lauren's pies. So thank you so much. I wish you well. And everybody, you've got to go buy this pie book. It's phenomenal.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really delightful. And as I mentioned to you before, I spent a lot of time in my neighborhood public library writing this book. So it feels really special to be able to talk to you here. And, I really still feel like a regular person. So I hope that what I make and share and offer in my book feels accessible to everyone.
Thank you, Lauren. We'll try. We'll try. I don't know if I'm that talented, but we'll try.
I believe in you.
And happy holiday season.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. With your next pies. And remember, as my great-grandfather said, a piece of pie a day leads to a long life.
Noted.
So thank you all for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this. And again, we wish you a happy holiday season and a wonderful piece of pie or tart to enjoy as well. Thank you and good night, everybody.
Night.